All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Eleanor Power, and I am the Director of Marketing Communications for Dalhousie University's Faculty of Open Learning and Career Development. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. And I'd like to introduce the host of today's webinar, and that is Marcus Hinds. And Marcus is an engineer with over 10 years of experience in the field. During his tenure, Marcus has managed corporate client accounts in both the utilities and engineering industry. This went well, and he decided to launch his own consulting firm. Customer success management has been useful to him in maintaining his own client relationships, but also something he practices with clients. They quickly understand and realize the value of improved customer relations as a valuable tool for the marketplace. Marcus has worked in heavy machinery account management and CSM, specifically in power generation and utilities in both Canada and the Caribbean, and holds a Bachelor of Science in Geomatics Engineering with an MBA specialized in service operations and management from the United Kingdom. Welcome, Marcus. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. If you have any questions, please include them in the chat, and we will save some time at the end to answer them. And over to you, Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Eleanor, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning, and there are a number of things that I'd like to go through with you, just to give you a feel for what the Customer Success Management Certificate, a new certificate coming from Dalhousie, is all about. So we'll start with a little bit of a definition, and we'll talk about some of the trends that are happening in the industry. You may be interested in what's going on in the general industry of Canada in terms of CSM, so we'll talk about that and why that's important. And then that'll lead us into career paths, possible career paths that you can take, possible career paths that can come from the certificate, and maybe just ways that you can network around the industry as well. And that's going to be important because I'm sure you'd want to know how you can navigate this entire industry as it expands throughout Canada in the coming years. Now, finally, we'll top it off with some course objectives. We'll look at the course structure, and we'll look at how the course will be evaluated as well. So I'll speak a bit about that. And then that will also take us into the credentialing of the course. So that's mainly the gist of what I'm going to speak about today. Now, after all of these topics that you see here on the left of the screen, we're going to have a little bit of question and answer. And that question and answer is really just going to be for you to ask questions about the certificate, anything you may not have caught, anything you're curious about. Really just to have a conversation to see if this is something that could be of value to you. And of course, we're talking about value because this is customer success management. It means that your success is very important to me. So that's one thing that I'm looking forward to here as well. Now, just before I change the slide, I have a little bit of a poll here that I wanted to engage. I think we had it there. So I just wanted to see if we can place that poll and have you answer some of the questions here, just to kind of engage you a bit, get your thoughts about that. And that question is, which of these terms first come to mind when you think about customer success management? And the acronym for that, of course, is CSM. I'll just give a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll go from there. I see the responses coming in. Okay. All right. So they're still coming in here, still loading in. All right, so roughly about 50% of persons said customer retention, then followed closely 38% by customer management. And then another 13% said operations improvement. So we have a clear winner here, that is customer retention. But I really wanted to tell you that all of these are essentially correct. Now, this was my poll here. And in other words, what does CSM mean to you? Essentially, that was the same question that we asked there with the poll. And I'm here to tell you that it's essentially everything and more that we just described. CSM really is the art of science and using customer operations of a particular company to maximize and to make that company more efficient and more streamlined. There are a number of ways you can do that. Customer retention is one of them. Operations management and improvement is one of them. And ensuring that your relationships with your customers are benefiting them is one of the most important ones as well. If you listen to the acronym very carefully, customer success, right? So if you're able to manage the success of your customer, if you're able to understand their goals, their needs, their wants, their desires, and you're able to appeal to that, well, then of course that's going to have value for you both. Now, the way that will have value for the customer is, of course, they will have their needs met, whatever it is they are looking for, they will be able to achieve from you or through your business relationship. And then for you as an organization, if you're able to solve your customers' needs, well, it's more than likely they're going to come back to you in the future for another problem to be solved. And what this really does for the business is it helps with revenue. It improves revenue over time. It improves the customer base over time, and improves relationships over time. So customer retention, customer success management really is about managing relationships to ensure that your customer base is effective and ensuring that you can appeal to those needs. Now, there's some other terms that you may hear here and some other processes that you may come across. And of course, we look at it from a process-driven view with this particular certificate. Customer relationship management is a large part of it. Streamlining interactions with customers is also part of it as well. And when I say streamlining interactions with customers, I mean, whenever the business and the customer interact, it should always be a pleasant experience for both. Of course, there are going to be issues. Of course, there are going to be misunderstandings. But of course, if you have things in place to help with those, well, then the effect of that can be minimized. That's some of the things that we go through in the course as well. Now, another part of CSM that's emerging, and I'll get into this in the next slide actually, is using data to help you to manage those customer relationships a bit better. And sometimes if you're able to understand where a person or where a particular organization or group of people even is coming from, you're able to appeal to their needs even better. So how do you use data, or how do you use the information available to you to be able to increase the success of that particular customer? And there are a number of scenarios that this can occur in. Inside the course, in the first course, there are 3 courses. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. In the first course, we talk about the different types of relationships there are. So we talk about business to business, business to customer, business to government, and we go through all the dynamics of those relationships as well. So how do you manage yourself in each of those relationships is a major question that we try to answer with the very first course. Right? So hopefully we can get through that. And if you do decide to enroll, that's one of the things that comes out of the first course. I'll talk about the second and third course in a bit as well. Now, another thing that we do is we try to improve the customer experience. And the actual course itself is built on quite a bit of interaction. So if you've ever had a very bad experience with an organization or with a firm, inside the course, you're actually going to have some room to talk about that, to detail your experience. What about it was bad? What became of it? Would you ever go to that business again? Things like that, right? And I find that outlets like that really help learners to detail their experience and then to use that experience and really learn the basics of what it is they're going through. So it's not just dry learning. It's not just learning theories and concepts. You're actually applying that to your experiences as well. So I think that's particularly something to look forward to, and that's something that I'll be looking forward to as well, because I want to hear about those experiences, good or bad. So that's one thing that we'll talk about as well. Now, improving operations is another part of CSM. And like I said, CSM is multifaceted, but marketing, outreach, and advertising is also a large part of that as well. How does the firm come across to persons? How does the firm look? What's the persona of the firm? And those are some of the things that we'll be looking at, specifically in the second course as well. And managing a diverse customer base. Of course, diversity is more important than ever. So how do you handle yourself in that situation when you have 20,000 customers and each particular customer has individual needs? How do you manage that? And that's one thing that we answered there as well. Now, going on to the next slide here, that's essentially the definition of the entire course, but I do want to talk a little bit about the entire trend of CSM, not only in Canada, but around the world in general. And these statistics that you're seeing here are coming from a report from the Government of Canada. I can actually provide the link for you. I was reading it a couple of days ago. This report essentially details the state of CSM in Canada and the state of retail and marketing, all of that in Canada. And one thing that that particular report highlighted is that the industry grows roughly, some years better, some years a little bit worse, but roughly 35% each 5 years. And if you look at that, that's roughly about 7, maybe 8% average growth each year, roughly about there. So that will just really tell you that it's a largely growing industry. It's growing very quickly. And then, of course, the data management part, the analytics, the big data, all of that is helping to fuel that as well. I'm sure you know that companies use data available to them to help them to market to you as well. So that's one of the things that we go over, and that is specifically the third course. Now, another thing that this report detailed is the fact that over the last, roughly about 10, 11 years, we had about $116 billion Canadian invested in the CSM industry, and that's quite a hefty investment. And of course, you know, with that type of money, they're not going to invest it unless it's going to give some sort of return. So it means that the industry is looking quite positive for the next few years. And one thing that will be very interesting to detail is how the pandemic has affected the entire industry. Now, as you can imagine, customers and customer bases are going to be shrinking. Persons are going to have less money to spend and may be worried about the economy and stuff like that. So it means that over the next few years, businesses are probably going to want to hold on to their customer base, kind of milk it a bit more, right? So you're going to see a lot of these positions, a lot of these programs popping up all over the next few years, at least until things start to settle down. But I'm sure that most businesses, I'm more than sure that most businesses will continue with that as long as they see the value in it, as long as they're able to reap the rewards of that as well. So roughly in 2009, 11, 12 years ago, roughly about there, you can see just over 500,000, sorry, people were employed in CSM in Canada. And of course, that is projected to grow as well. And you can see with these graphs here on the right, forecasted growth 2009 to 2012, and that can be extrapolated all the way into 21, all the way into 2030 as well. And you can see some of the fastest growing industries here as well. So roughly after the recession, 2007, 2008, logistics and transportation was kind of a big thing. And then retail kind of bounced back a little bit later in the millennium. And then you also have some other quickly growing industries there as well, right? So regardless of whatever industry you're in, CSM will have some value for you as well. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, moving on to the next slide, you can see that there's some parts of Canada that are a little bit in front in terms of CSM. Most of the eastern provinces, as we said, most of us are in Atlantic Canada. Of course, you know, the Atlantic Canada is no different. But essentially what's happening in the industry is that employers are looking for CSM talent, and they want good CSM talent. Right? So they not only want that, they need it. If they want to survive over the next 10, 15, 20 years, when things may be a bit challenging from the fallout from the pandemic, of course, they're going to have to find ways to maneuver around the industry. I'm more than sure that CSM is going to be a very large part of that as well. Now, as you know, CSM is changing, but again, that data is being used to streamline everything as well. And that's another thing that we look at in the course as well. We look at how data is used, what it's used for, different data points you can collect. And another thing that we look at is KPIs. What is it that you're measuring in terms of the data that's being collected as well? So we will talk about that mostly in the second course. The service industry has been drastically changed in the past 3 years. Of course, you know that just before the pandemic, things were at an all-time high, and then you just had everything change essentially overnight. So a lot of businesses had to find ways to adapt to that, had to find ways of working around different regulations, changing constantly, things like that. It completely is a new playing field, a new environment, essentially in the short span of maybe a month, 2 months. So how do you navigate that is another thing that we discuss as well. Now, this is the significance of the actual certificate. And when you log into the certificate page, I can also provide you that link, Mary. I can send that over to you once you're finished here. If you log into, or if you go to the actual page on the right side, the image that you see on the right side is what you'll see. And this is essentially the certificate itself at now, able to sign up for that. And it also talks about the significance of the certificate as well. Why is something like this even important? Well, like I said, the last few years have been challenging for business, especially the last year and a half, and then the next coming years, businesses want to know how to navigate that. Right? So essentially, they're going to be looking for ways to do that. And there's some businesses that will try anything they can. And then there's some other businesses that will hone in on one particular thing and try that. So for some businesses, it may be CSM. Let's try to improve the relationships with our customer base and go from there. And then some others may try to cut costs. They may try to improve operations. They may try different nips and pieces until they find something that works. So it just really depends on the particular company that you're working for at the time. Or even if you're employed for yourself, it just depends on how you want to approach it as well. So for some of the things that are significant about the certificate, I think the actual approach to the certificate as well is somewhat of a hybrid. Like I said, there's quite a bit of discussion in the certificate. So that means that learners will be able to learn actively. They'll be able to apply the concepts that we go over to their actual experiences, and then they'll be able to look at that from a different lens. And I think that's one particular thing that's very exciting, simply because each learner has unique experiences, and it'd be great to share that. And then not only to share that, but to understand the concepts within that, the principles that underpin that as well. So that will be particularly important. Some of the other things that we go through, and this is getting into some of the core competencies here of the entire certificate, but it's like understanding the functions within any given firm, understanding how CSM fits into the bigger picture of the entire industry. Looking at customer segmentation. Now, some of these words may be a bit new to you, but in the course, we actually go through this. But I want you to think of this. You have a customer base. You have 20,000 people that are demanding your particular product. And you know a little bit about these people. But how do you appeal to each individual's needs or each group's needs? And that's where customer segmentation really comes in. You just use some segmentation values, use a little bit of an algorithm to help you kind of divide persons in terms of what they need from you and how to manage that best you can as well. So we'll talk about that, especially in second and third courses as well. It's also a tactic to reduce costs. The course itself also reduces real examples. Like I said, there's a bit of discussion. And one of the main things that we touch on, especially very early on, is churn and turnover. And churn and turnover, this really means when you have a business, you're supporting that business, and for whatever reason, that business loses you or you lose business. You don't want to do business with them any longer. Maybe the relationship was not beneficial. Maybe there was something hindering the relationship. Maybe it just wasn't working, something. How can you prevent that in a business setting? How can you stop your customers from leaving you and going to the competition or going somewhere else? And one thing I want to point out just before I go on to the next slide is the fact that churn and turnover are actually very costly for a business, especially for firms that sell larger equipment. In some cases, you have to train persons how to use your particular equipment or how to use your sales process, things like that. And every time you lose a customer and replace them with a new customer, you have to train them again. You have to get them up to speed to understand, how you do business and things like that. That's actually very exhausting and very costly for a firm as well. I'm sure you would have had some experience with that, working with a new company or something of the sort, right? So how do you help reduce that? What are some of the things that you can do to avoid that? Now, for this slide here, just have a little bit of a poll. And that poll is all about your current role. So let's see if we can have that poll and see if we can get some responses. Yeah.
So that poll doesn't, let me just see here. Okay. So what I might do, we just have a, don't seem to see it here, Marcus. So maybe what we'll do instead of the poll, maybe we'll just ask people to contribute through the chat.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Thanks. So I think a valuable question here would be, what type of role are you involved in? Is it a sales position? Is it a management position? Is it some sort of an outreach position? Is it a supporting position for any of these in between? Let me repeat that. Seeing some.
So feel free to add your comments in the chat and just make sure that you've indicated when you're typing in a comment in the chat, that you indicate that you want it to go to all panelists and attendees. It will default to only show that your comment is going to all panelists. So just make sure that you have that clicked off and it will show up there.
Question one more time. It's what type of role are you involved in currently? Managerial? Is it sales-based? Is it support? Is it other? Right. Let's see if
I've just added it in the chat there.
Okay, perfect. Let's see some chats coming in there. Okay. Finance, right? Okay. So let's see if we can get some responses. What type of role are you currently involved in? So we've got finance so far, managers, okay, support based, deal with staff lots, right? Okay. All right, as those responses come in, one thing I wanted to highlight is some of the possible career paths that can come out of the CSM program, taking the entire certificate. And essentially, service manager and general manager, essentially one of the very large ones, simply because you're able to understand the different interdependencies of different departments and how they work together in tandem with each other to offer the customer what they need, to offer the customer's goals. Another one, and I've done this for quite some time, is an account manager. And like I said, account managers really can be across any industry. It can be from IT all the way to heavy machinery, capital purchasing, it could be building management, it could be essentially anything. And the main thing with account managers is essentially to keep your customers happy, but it's not a short relationship. It's a relationship over time that has to be built, has to be maintained as well. So how do you manage yourself in that particular scenario? How do you maintain that relationship over time? So understand how to measure your service performance, how you're doing, how well of a job you're doing, and then how to improve that over time as well. Another possible career path is a sales manager. And like I said, these are not hard and fast career paths. You can mix it and match it with any career experience that you have. There's several different paths that you can take. I've seen several people involved in aviation, hotel industry. I've seen it all over. So it really just depends on how you want to use it. But these are some of the most highlightable ones, or some of the ones of notable mention that I wanted to bring across here today. Sales managers, reviewing how the entire firm supports the sales process, and especially for sales-driven companies, sometimes that is extremely important because that is the source of all of your revenue, right? So if you're able to streamline and make that process a bit better, if you're able to increase sales, you probably increase the health of the overall company. And how do you do that, right? That's another thing that we look at as well. Customer service managers, customer success managers, customer managers, whatever you want to call them, whatever you may hear them referred to as, there's several different names that they can be referred to as in the industry. Understanding how users of your service impact your service and how the service impacts them is another important part of that as well. Another important part of anything, if you're going to understand how to improve anything, you have to understand how it functions first. This is another great part of the certificate as well. We look at all of those systems, all of those interdependencies, then we go from there as well. All right, moving on. So you may be asking yourself by now, who is the certificate best suited to? Like I said, there's no hard and fast rule particularly, but of notable mention, persons that own businesses, general salespersons, general managers, senior managers, executive managers, those types, operations managers, operations technicians as well, supervisors, executives, technical persons, anything that is to do with heavy machinery or anything with capital purchasing. And capital purchasing sometimes can be an intangible object, something like a brand or a license or software access, things like that. Those are also capital purchases as well, because sometimes the purchases are quite hefty as well, depending on what's being purchased. So all of these things, all of these different positions essentially are some of the persons that should enroll, would find benefit, would find value in the CSM course as well. And like I said, this is not a hard and fast list. It's open to more, but these are the ones of notable mention. Now, this is the exciting part here. I'm not sure if we have a poll here, Mary Eleanor, but I think I see one here. Is there one that we can load just before I get into a bit of the course structure? Is there a poll when we're like around?
I don't believe so, Marcus. We just had those two polls that.
I see. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. All right. So I just wanted to get in here to the course structure a bit. Like I said, essentially the course, the entire certificate is made up of 3 individual courses, and each course is micro-credentialing. When I say that, I just mean that each course has core competencies that you will learn that are a bit different from all of the other courses. And once you're finished each course, you will be able to apply those concepts to whatever it is you're doing in terms of your profession. So course number 1 is called the Understanding course, Understanding CSM. And that course is really understanding how relationships work in business. And like I said before, that's where really we talk about the business to business relationships, business to customer, business to government, business to other. We talk about those types of relationships and we look at some of the dynamics that are present in those types of relationships generally as well, how to manage those relationships to retain customers. We also look at some of the systems that need to be in place within a firm to retain customers and also to enhance customer experience as well. Of course, it's not just one thing that has to be done, it's a series of things. So what is the first step in that and how do you get to that? And then how does the entire firm work together? Now, the question that I had here was about functions. What is the function, or have you ever heard of a function? What is the function that you work in within your department? And have you ever heard of a function, or have you ever heard it referred to as a function before? The function really is just kind of a technical term, technical lingo for a department. So you could be in marketing, you could be in IT, you could be in operations, you could be in HR, it could be any of these. What are some of the functions that persons are involved in here? Get any event planning, okay. Educational training, look at that, all right. Okay, I'll peek back at those in a minute, but just wanted to talk about the functions there. And that's another thing that we go through in the first course as well. What are the different functions in a business and how do those come together to help with customer retention and customer management as well? Now, the second course is a little bit more detailed and in-depth. And the second course is where we're looking to get you up to speed in terms of your writing, in terms of your expression. Like I said, there's a little bit of a discussion in the course. So by the time you get to the second course, you understand how to express yourself, you have the basics of that, and now it's time to build on that foundation. So we look at things like creating a CSM program from scratch for companies that don't have a CSM program. What are some of the things that they need to put in place to get this started, and how do you implement that type of a program? To do that, we have to understand a number of things. Things like strategy, of course, is a big buzzword in business. Position is another one. Vision is another one. Mission is another one as well. So what do those words mean? Of course, you might have heard of those words before, but essentially they're used interchangeably. So we'll look at how those are important to helping businesses create these types of programs from scratch as well. Now, the third course is all about refining customer success strategies. If you look closely here, you'll realize it's a trend. So in course 1, you understand how to do it. In course number 2, you need to understand the basis of doing it, or actually doing it, understand what is there. And then in the third course, how do you make it better? How do you make it functional so you can move on to the next thing, right? And this is where we look at things like choosing the most suitable, I don't want to say tactics, but we can say tactics. But some of the things that you do day to day, how can you use those things to make the CSM program more valuable for both you and the customer as well? Another thing that we look at in the third course, how do you measure how effective your CSM effort is? Of course, you may be reaching out to customers, you may be engaging them, but is that effective? Like, what is it doing? How does that benefit the business? And one thing that we look at in the third course is how to measure that. And that's particularly important as well. And that is so that you're not just doing CSM in a vacuum, so that you know that the actual program is working. right? So a little bit of value there so you're able to understand that. Like I said, each of these are individual courses, and when they are all taken in series, they form the certificate, the CSM certificate. And that is because each one is evaluated a bit different. So like I said, the first course is a little bit light compared to the other two. And that's just where we get up to speed. We get the definitions in, we start to understand everything. We kind of feel the industry around. And then from the second course, we look at some actual practical exams. We do some more exams, and then we also participate in discussions. And those discussions are for you to take the principles that we have gone over and apply those principles to the real world. So it's not just learning in a vacuum. It's not just learning a theory. Pardon me, you're honestly applying everything that you would have learned. So for course one, you have 1 written practical, 7 exams. There's a couple minimum exams in there as well. Then for course 2, you have 1 written practical, 6 exams, and some discussion as well. And then that leads up to the third course, which is a little bit heavier on discussions, a little bit lighter on the exams, but that really just is coming down to you being able to write and express yourself. So if that's one thing that you're interested in, this particular course will be of value to you. If you're able to write currently, you can develop that. And if you're not able to, well, that's one thing that we'll be doing over the course. How do you take all this jargon, all these different words that we hear, strategies and missions and customer success and whatnot, and how do you articulate yourself to actually mean something, to bring something of value over? Right, so that's some of the things that we'll be looking at as well. Now, accreditations and micro-credentialing. So these are essentially the core competencies of each course, and I kind of just described them. But some of the main things, the main takeaways from course number 1, lots of the jargon that we'll go through for course number 2 and 3. So course number 1 is the foundational course. That lays the foundation, then we build on top of that foundation after that. But how do you use communication and interpersonal skills in CSM as well? And then how do you read financials? How do you know the health of a company? How do you know customer segmentation skills? Are those things that are valuable to us? Now, of course there are, but that's some of the things that we'll look at in the first course. Those are some of the core competencies in the first course. Second course, also micro-credentials, looks at optimization and improvement skills. Suited to rolling out a CSM program. So if you're looking at a CSM program for a particular business, what are some of the things that you need to put in place? And how do you do that, right? So that's one of the things that we look at in the second course. And how does CSM affect the firm's operation as well? Remember, we spoke about measuring. How do you understand how well of a job you're doing in terms of CSM as well? Now, finally, in that course, we'll look at some of the strategies that can improve the firm's position in the marketplace based on CSM. And we'll look at some real world examples to do that. So has anyone ever shopped at IKEA before? Do you like IKEA? Are you a fan of IKEA, or have you had a bad experience with IKEA? And that's one of the examples that we'll be looking at. So if you particularly like IKEA, or if you particularly avoid IKEA for whatever reason, inside the course, especially in course 2, you may have a chance, you will have a chance to detail that experience and then to look at how the principles apply to that as well. So something to look forward to there. Now for the third course, this is really where you top off everything. This is where you use those skills that you would have learned in course 1 and course 2 and apply it. And this is where you're understanding now how to execute a CSM project, how to execute CSM program, and how really to navigate the industry, things like professional practice, things like law, some of the regulations that you have to adhere to, and then just basically some of the skills that you need to make these types of programs functional in any industry, essentially, right? So, like I said, they all form the certificate course, and each one is micro-credentialed as well, meaning that you can use each one as its individual course. So even if you wanted to do a course on operations improvement or whatever, you could do the second course and you will have that under your belt. They all form the certificate, but each one has its own value as well. Now that is essentially everything that I wanted to go through for this morning, but I cannot leave you without taking some of your questions. So I wanted to do that now. And I wanted to thank you for lending an ear for the past few minutes as well. So over to Mary Ellen. Are there any questions I've got to take?
Awesome. So welcome your questions. I'm going to add in the link to the certificate, and please, that's great, Holly. Thanks very much. Holly's just said here she's definitely interested in proceeding with the certificate in the future, and that's fantastic. I'm going to just add in the link here so you can look at the courses in more detail. Are there any questions, anything that Mark has highlighted? Do you need any kind of math background to take this? Great question.
That's a great question. You don't need a math background. There is a little bit of math that we go through, particularly in the first course when we're looking at the financials, things like revenue, stuff like that, and then we come back to that in the third course. But it's essential. I think it's essential. Not. I particularly think it's not rocket science. I think it's very simple math that you'll be able to understand, and with a little bit of practice, good to go. I personally think that. So no, you do not need a math background to take this.
That's great. And I want to highlight as well, you know, the courses have been structured to allow for people to take them while they're working full time. So they are, you know, offered online, and there are some exams, as Marcus had mentioned, but we really try to kind of create these certificate experiences that that meet you where you are, and in any kind of other commitments that you might have, and still allow you to complete the certificate, to add to your credentials. I would love to hear a little bit more, Marcus, just your perspective on, because I could see in some industries people perceiving customer success management and that topic as a nice to have and not a must have. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, and just I think the broad application of these principles.
I think one thing that you're really able to understand after completing the course is integration. How does the entire thing work together? And I was just designing a little part of the course there that talks about the art of war, and the art of war is all about strategy. And essentially for that, what you have to do if you're an army general, you have to understand how to use your different platoons to be able to win the battle. And the marketplace, CSM, is essentially the same thing. How do you engage with your customers? What are some of the tools that you can use available to you? And to be able to do that, you need to understand what each function within your firm does, and then how can you leverage that function to be able to, you know, get the goal, get the value that it is that you're trying to find, or the value that you're trying to get. Yeah.
That's a really, great answer. Thank you. And there are a couple of, just a question and a comment, and I might defer to my colleagues, Mark or Yuseni, who are joining us, who also work with the faculty. There's a question from Georgina here. Is this the only time the course will be offered? And it's not the best time for them to take time away from work. So there are 3 courses as part of the certificate, and just Yuseni or Mark, if I'll actually just, let me see here.
When they're finished, I can add to that as well.
I'm happy to add Yuseni and Mark if you wish to unmute yourself and offer a comment to Georgina's question. That would be great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks.
Yes. So course 1 will start in September. We'll offer course 2 in the winter term, and then course 3 will run next, I guess the spring summer term next, I think it's May. However, we will be offering this certificate as asynchronous, like a self-directed like method, as soon as Marcus runs through it once. So we have the material for any self-directed students. So the asynchronous offering won't be available for probably until, I guess, next summer, once Mark goes through all 3 courses. But like I said, the synchronous offering, which has the online live sessions once per week, like I said, it'll run, basically a course will run every semester, like I mentioned earlier.
And I don't know if you can hear me, but so
Yes.
it'll run on essentially the same schedule starting next fall as well.
Right.
Which is, I know, a year away,
Yes.
but it's another option if you want the live interaction with Marcus versus listening to the recordings that will be recorded as he goes through the courses this time, the first time.
And one thing I'd like to add as well is that essentially the course is designed to be flexible. Like the exams are on demand, all the discussions and what's not are on demand. Of course, there's suggested due dates, but that's not necessarily something that's rigid per se, right? So there are some suggested dates there that you should meet to keep you on track, but it's essentially designed to be flexible. So I'm sure that it could probably suit your schedule, depending on what you have going on. Of course, you would know a bit better, but yeah, it's designed to be flexible.
That's great. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And just a comment here from Holly. Our organization has gone through many changes, and I think, especially with the pandemic, it is important to work on customer service. It doesn't seem to be on a lot of managers' radars, but people appreciate you attempting to understand and work with them. Marcus, do you want to offer any additional comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes it's not on a lot of managers' radars simply because it's not necessarily referred to as a term. It's not referred to as a thing. They do know that they have to engage with customers better. They do know that they have to streamline operations and reduce costs, but it's not referred to by a holistic term as CSM. So sometimes, in my experience, it's been there, but the bits and pieces are there. So the program really just helps to put everything into perspective and to bring it all together into one. I think in the next coming years, it's definitely going to be more and more popular as persons understand that they have to do something to operate in the current environment and the future environment that will be there as well.
Absolutely.
Understanding how to work with people is absolutely important as well. Simply because, again, business is based on relationships. So if you're able to, understand the relationship itself, be able to at least use that to benefit the relationship, to be able to meet the goals that you want from the relationship.
And I really just can't emphasize enough, the importance of what you'll learn and what you'll take away. And you really commented on this, Marcus, but if you do have a chance to go in and review the certificate description in detail, I'll just highlight it here, but an overview of what you'll learn, an overview of loyalty programs, how to hire the right people for customer retention, anti-spam laws, and how to promote yourself as a customer service professional. I think those are really, really valuable. And Holly, you've kind of nailed it. Will be great benefit for you in your position, and I think a great benefit for a lot of people in a variety of industries for the future. As people become more maybe picky, really, as customers, and we already are, really. All of us are customers, and we know that we really value a good online experience, a good customer service experience. And that will only increase. So I think there's a lot of value and a lot of really tangible takeaways that you can gain from the certificate. So, I really, really appreciate your time, Marcus, in walking us through with such enthusiasm and detail what people can expect from the certificate. And I'll just mention to everyone who's joined us today that later today we will be sending over a recording. We'll be emailing everyone with a recording of today's webinar. So if you want to go through anything again, or send it to your peers, forward it along to your peers, we'll be sending that along. It'll be hosted on our YouTube channel as well. We will have Marcus's email address included in that email. So if you have any questions specifically about the certificate, feel free to reach out to him directly. And then we'll also have a link to the certificate so you can go in and dig deeper into what the courses offer and learn more. So thanks so much, Marcus, again for taking the time to put this together and host us today. And thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.